Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my channel? Thank you so much. In the blood-soaked annals of Roman imperial history, few stories capture the depths of human cruelty and desperation quite like that of Sporus, a beautiful young boy whose fate became intertwined with one of history's most notorious emperors. This is not merely a tale of political intrigue or military conquest, but a haunting examination of power's ability to strip away humanity itself, leaving behind only the grotesque theater of imperial whim. Sporus' story unfolds like a nightmare within the marble halls of ancient Rome, where the line between love and possession, between honor and degradation, dissolved entirely under the mad gaze of Nero. The year was 65 AD, and the Roman Empire, stretched from Britain to the Euphrates, its power seemingly limitless under the rule of Nero, Claudius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus. Yet within the opulent walls of the Domus Aurea, Nero's golden palace, a darkness festered that would soon consume an innocent young life. The emperor, now in his late 20s, had already shocked Roman society with his theatrical performances, his architectural excesses, and his volatile relationships with those closest to him. Rome itself bore the scars of the Great Fire of 64 AD, and whispers of the emperor's madness echoed through the streets like smoke from the still, smoldering ruins. In this world of imperial excess and casual cruelty, young Sporus lived as a freedman in the imperial household, a position that, while technically free, offered little protection from the whims of absolute power. Historical accounts describe him as possessing an almost ethereal beauty, with delicate features and a graceful bearing that would prove to be both his distinction and his doom. The boy had caught the attention of the imperial court not through any ambition of his own, but simply by existing in a world where beauty itself could become a currency of suffering. The catalyst for Sporus' tragic transformation came in the form of a woman's death. Pompeia Sabina, Nero's second wife, and the great love of his tumultuous life, had died under mysterious circumstances. In 65 AD, some ancient sources suggest Nero himself killed her in a fit of rage, kicking her while she was pregnant, though other accounts point to complications during childbirth. Regardless of the truth, Pompeia's death left Nero devastated, consumed by a grief that would soon curdle into something far more sinister. The emperor's mourning took on an obsessive quality, as he desperately sought ways to resurrect or replace the woman he claimed to love above all others. It was during this period of imperial mourning that fate delivered Sporus into Nero's sight. Whether through coincidence or design, the young freedman was noticed by the emperor, who was struck by what he perceived as a startling resemblance to his dead wife. Ancient historians like Cassius Dio and Suetonius recorded that Nero became fixated on this resemblance, seeing in Sporus delicate features an opportunity to somehow reclaim what death had stolen from him. The emperor's grief-stricken mind began to conceive of a plan so audacious and horrific that it would shock even the jaded sensibilities of imperial Rome. The decision, when it came, was swift and irreversible. Nero commanded that Sporus be castrated, permanently altering the young man's body to better serve the emperor's twisted vision. This was not merely physical mutilation, but a complete erasure of Sporus' identity as a man, transforming him into something that existed solely for Nero's psychological comfort. The castration was performed by imperial physicians, likely in the sterile luxury of the palace's medical quarters, where screams could be muffled by marble walls, and the boy's protests could be dismissed as the insignificant complaints of property. Following the mutilation, Nero's plan revealed its full horror. The emperor announced his intention to marry Sporus in a public ceremony, treating the traumatized young man as a replacement for his beloved Pompeia. This was not marriage, as Romans understood it, but a grotesque parody that violated every social, religious, and legal custom of the empire. Sporus was given a new name, Sabina, after the dead empress, and was dressed in the finest women's clothing, adorned with jewelry that had once belonged to Pompeia herself. The emperor's household was commanded to treat Sporus as the empress, addressing him with feminine titles and observing all the protocols due to an imperial wife. The wedding ceremony itself was a spectacle of imperial madness played out before the horrified eyes of Roman society. Sporus, barely recognizable in his elaborate feminine attire, was led through the rituals of Roman marriage while the emperor played the role of devoted bridegroom. Ancient sources described the ceremony as both magnificent and deeply disturbing. With all the pomp and circumstance of a legitimate imperial wedding masking the fundamental horror of what was actually taking place. Guests were forced to participate in this charade, offering congratulations and wedding gifts while privately recoiling from the emperor's grotesque theater. The aftermath of this bizarre union saw Sporus paraded through Rome as Nero's empress, forced to appear at public events and ceremonies in his feminine guise. The young man, now completely dependent on the emperor's protection and favor, had no choice but to play his assigned role. He was required to accompany Nero to the theater, to official functions, and even to private dinners, where he would be displayed like a precious object, a living memorial to a dead woman. The psychological toll of this existence, of being forced to live as someone else entirely. Someone who is not only dead, but whose death may have been caused by the very man who now claimed to love her memory, must have been devastating beyond measure. During these public appearances, Roman citizens would witness this strange sight. The emperor was accompanied by what appeared to be a beautiful young woman. But knowing the truth behind the elaborate facade, some historians suggest that the Roman people, while accustomed to imperial eccentricity, were deeply disturbed by this particular display. The sight of Sporus, dressed in the regalia of an empress, but bearing the subtle signs of his true nature and his surgical mutilation, served as a constant reminder of the depths to which their emperor had fallen. It was a living symbol of power's ability to corrupt not just the soul, but reality itself. The relationship between Nero and Sporus, if it can be called that, was characterized by the emperor's possessive obsession and the young man's complete powerlessness. Nero treated Sporus as both a beloved wife and a cherished possession, showering him with gifts and attention while simultaneously denying him any agency or identity beyond his role as Papaya's replacement. The emperor would address Sporus by his dead wife's name, speak to him as if he were actually the woman he had lost, and expect him to respond in character. This psychological torture, the constant demand to embody someone else's identity while his own was systematically erased, represented a form of cruelty that went far beyond physical harm. Ancient sources provide glimpses into the strange dynamic of this forced relationship. Suetonius writes that Nero would take Sporus on tours of Greece, displaying him to foreign dignitaries and Greek aristocrats as his empress. These journeys must have been particularly harrowing for Sporus, as he was forced to maintain his feminine persona in unfamiliar settings, surrounded by strangers who either believed the charade or were forced to pretend they did. The constant performance, the inability to ever drop the mask or express his true feelings, created a prison of identity from which there was no escape. The emperor's treatment of Sporus also revealed the depths of his own psychological instability. Nero's love for Papaya had been possessive and often violent during her lifetime, and his relationship with her replacement carried the same dangerous intensity. The emperor would fly into rages if Sporus failed to perfectly embody the memory of his dead wife, punishing him for failings that existed only in Nero's disturbed imagination. Yet the emperor could also be tender and generous, lavishing expensive gifts on Sporus, and treating him with the affection he had once shown Poppaea, creating a cycle of abuse and reward that must have been psychologically devastating. As the months passed, the bizarre nature of this arrangement became increasingly apparent to everyone in the imperial household. Servants and courtiers were forced to navigate the complex etiquette of addressing Sporus as an empress, while knowing the truth of his situation. They witnessed the daily humiliations, the constant need to maintain a feminine persona, and the psychological toll took on the young man. Some may have felt pity, others revulsion, but all were complicit in maintaining the elaborate lie that had become the foundation of Nero's emotional stability. The strain of this existence was evident. In every aspect of Sporus' daily life, he was required to wear women's clothing at all times, to speak in a manner deemed appropriate for an empress, and to participate in activities and conversations that reinforced his assigned identity. The surgical mutilation he had endured made certain aspects of this performance easier to maintain, but it also served as a constant physical reminder of what had been taken from him. Every movement, every gesture, every word had to be carefully calculated to maintain the illusion that he was indeed the woman Nero wanted him to be. The political implications of Nero's actions were not lost on the Roman Senate and the broader aristocracy. The emperor's marriage to Sporus was seen as yet another sign of his growing instability and his contempt for Roman tradition and values. While few dared to openly criticize the emperor, private conversations and correspondence from the period revealed the shock and disgust felt by many Romans. The spectacle of their emperor parading a castrated boy dressed as his dead wife was seen as a symbol of the moral decay that had infected the highest levels of government. This situation continued for several years, with Sporus trapped in his role as Nero's ersatz empress, unable to escape or even express his true feelings about his circumstances. The psychological damage inflicted by years of forced identity erasure, combined with the physical trauma of his castration and the constant stress of maintaining an elaborate deception, took an increasingly visible toll. Contemporary accounts suggest that Sporus became increasingly withdrawn and melancholic, though he had little choice but to continue playing his assigned role. The emperor's attachment to Sporus became so complete that he seemed to genuinely believe at times that he had somehow restored his beloved Poppaea to life. This delusion, if it can be called that, created moments of genuine tenderness between the two, but it also intensified the horror of Sporus' situation. He was not merely playing a role, he was expected to become someone else entirely, to surrender his own identity so completely that even he might forget who he had once been. The psychological complexity of this relationship, with its mixture of love, obsession, cruelty, and delusion, defied easy categorization, even by the standards of an age accustomed to imperial excess. As Nero's reign progressed, political tensions throughout the empire began to reach a breaking point. The emperor's theatrical pursuits, his neglect of administrative duties, and his increasingly erratic behavior had alienated many of his supporters and emboldened his enemies. Military commanders in various provinces began to question their loyalty to an emperor who seemed more interested in playing dress-up with a castrated boy than in governing the vast territories under his control. The sight of Sporus, draped in imperial regalia and treated as an empress, became a symbol of everything that was wrong with Nero's leadership. In 68 AD, the political situation finally collapsed entirely. The Praetorian Guard, the Senate, and several provincial governors declared their opposition to Nero's continued rule. Faced with universal rejection and the certainty of a painful death if captured, the emperor fled Rome with a small group of loyal supporters, including the young man, who had been given no choice in his original fate, now found himself bound to a falling emperor, his own survival dependent on the whims of a man who had already proven capable of any cruelty in service of his desires. The final days of Nero's reign were marked by chaos and terror as news of rebellions and defections reached the imperial party. The emperor's behavior became even more erratic. He spoke alternately of grand plans for escape and theatrical schemes for a dramatic final performance. Throughout this period, Sporus remained by his side, still dressed in his feminine attire, still playing the role of the devoted empress, even as the empire crumbled around them. The young man must have realized that his fate was inextricably linked to that of the emperor who had destroyed his life, and that Nero's fall would likely mean his own destruction as well. When Nero finally committed suicide in June 68 AD, reportedly, with the help of his secretary, Epaphroditus, Sporus was left to face an uncertain future. The emperor's death did not bring the young man freedom. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new phase of his nightmare. As one of the most visible symbols of Nero's reign, Sporus represented both a living reminder of imperial excess and a potentially valuable political asset. The various factions competing for power in the aftermath of Nero's death would each have their own plans. For the young man who had been forced to play the role of empress, the immediate aftermath of Nero's death saw Sporus passed from one powerful figure to another, treated as a prize or trophy rather than a human being with his own desires and agency. The new Emperor Galba reportedly took possession of Sporus, along with other remnants of Nero's household. This transfer was not a rescue or liberation. It was simply another transaction in which Sporus had no voice or choice. The young man, who had once been a free citizen, then a mutilated plaything, now became a symbol of conquest and political legitimacy for whoever could claim him. Under Galba's rule, Sporus' situation remained precarious and humiliating. The new emperor, while lacking Nero's theatrical obsessions, still saw value in possessing this living reminder of his predecessor's reign. Sporus was kept in a kind of luxurious captivity, still required to maintain aspects of his feminine presentation, but no longer treated as an actual empress. This liminal existence, neither fully male nor female, neither free nor enslaved, neither honored nor completely discarded, must have been psychologically devastating for someone who had already endured years of identity destruction. The political instability that followed Nero's death, the period historians call the Year of the Four Emperors, meant that Sporus' fate remained uncertain as different factions rose and fell in rapid succession. When Galba was assassinated in January 69 AD, Sporus found himself once again transferred to new ownership. The young man had become a kind of imperial inheritance, passed from ruler to ruler like a piece of valuable furniture or a work of art. Each transition brought new uncertainties and new humiliations as he was forced to adapt to the expectations and desires of each successive master. The Emperor Otho, who briefly held power after Galba's assassination, reportedly treated Sporus with relative kindness, perhaps recognizing something of his own precarious position in the young man's situation. However, Otho's reign lasted only a few months before he too was defeated and forced to commit suicide. Once again, Sporus faced the terrifying prospect of being claimed by yet another new ruler. Each transition stripping away a little more of whatever dignity and identity he had managed to preserve through his ordeal. It was under the Emperor Vitellius that Sporus' situation reached its final, most degrading phase. Vitellius, who had defeated Otho and claimed the purple for himself, apparently decided that Sporus would provide entertainment for the Roman masses. The emperor planned to force the young man to appear in the arena, not as a gladiator, but as a participant in a grotesque reenactment of the rape of Persephone, the mythological scene of a young maiden's abduction and violation. This plan represented the ultimate degradation. Sporus would be forced to play the role of a woman being sexually assaulted for the amusement of thousands of spectators. The prospect of this final humiliation proved to be more than Sporus could bear. After years of forced feminization, identity erasure, and sexual exploitation, the idea of being violated in public as entertainment for the Roman mob was apparently the breaking point. Ancient sources record that Sporus chose death rather than endure this ultimate degradation, taking his own life before Vitellius could carry out his cruel plan. In his final act, Sporus reclaimed the one thing that had been denied him throughout his ordeal, the power to make his own choice about his fate. The suicide of Sporus marked the end of one of the most disturbing episodes in Roman imperial history. His death was not mourned by the general public, nor was it seen as a significant political event. He had been reduced to such a state of dehumanization that his passing was noted primarily as a minor inconvenience to Vitellius's entertainment plans. Yet in choosing death over further degradation, Sporus demonstrated a courage and dignity that had been systematically denied him throughout his adult life. His final act was both a rejection of the role he had been forced to play and an assertion of his fundamental humanity. The story of Sporus forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of power and the human capacity for both cruelty and survival. In a world where absolute authority could transform a free young man into a living doll, where identity itself could be surgically and psychologically altered to serve the whims of a madman, we see reflected the darkest possibilities of unchecked power. Sporus's tragedy was not merely personal. It was a symptom of a system that valued human beings only insofar as they could serve the desires of those who held ultimate authority. The historical legacy of Sporus's story serves as a reminder that behind the grand narratives of empire and conquest lie countless individual tragedies of people who were powerless to resist the forces that shaped their lives. His experience illuminates the particular vulnerabilities of those who lived at the margins of Roman society, the freedmen, slaves, and others whose lives could be casually destroyed by the powerful. The fact that his story was recorded at all speaks to its exceptional nature, but it also suggests that similar abuses, perhaps less dramatic, but no less devastating to those who suffered them, were likely commonplace in a society built on rigid hierarchies and the absolute power of the emperor. Modern readers might find themselves asking how such cruelty was possible, how a society could tolerate or even celebrate such systematic dehumanization. Yet Sporus's story also demonstrates the remarkable resilience of the human spirit, the ability to endure unimaginable suffering while still maintaining some core sense of self. His final choice, tragic as it was, represented a victory of sorts, a refusal to be completely broken, even by forces that seemed capable of rewriting reality itself. In remembering Sporus, we honor not only his suffering, but also his ultimate act of defiance against those who sought to erase his humanity entirely.